large chapter, chapter 13, the central nervous system. Okay. We kind of stopped off talking about the functional systems in the brain. One of them is your limbic system, the other is your reticular formation. Okay? The limbic system, you can kind of think of this as your emotional processing system. And there are quite a few structures that are made up of that make up your limbic system. Okay? The other one is the reticular formation, and we talked about the reticular formation a little bit when we were talking about the brainstem. It is a pretty large piece of your brainstem, and it helps with arousal. Not so much like sexual arousal, more so like keeping you awake. More so stimulating portions and parts of your brain to keep it active and keep it functioning. So this reticular formation helps you stay awake, keeps your brain functioning, keeps your brain active. So it's going to be close to that deep gray brain matter. Deep gray brain matter. And you're also going to find pieces, bits and bobs of it in the diencephalon. Okay? Your limbic system is made up of the septal nuclei, the cingulate gyrus, and the hippocampal formation, as well as a little part of the amygdaloid body. But that amygdaloid body, you're going to see that also a little bit in the reticular formation. Okay. The fornix is just that little bridge that kind of keeps those tracks of the limbic system together and allow them to function together. Right? So, the emotional brain is what we term the cingulate gyrus. And that is what allows us to kind of shift between thoughts, shift between emotions, things of that nature. All right? It interprets pain as being unpleasant. So like if you put your hand on the stove that's been on for like an hour, you're going to be like, oh, that hurts. It's not just a stimulus, it is a painful stimulus. And it is your cingulate gyrus that is allowing you to kind of realize, hey, this is painful versus this being a nice, general, regular stimuli. Okay. The hippocampal formation is made up of the hippocampus and the parahippocampal gyri, and these play a role in memory formation. The amygdaloid body, that has some very specific nuclei in the brain, and these nuclei function to help you processing fear and stimulating the appropriate response. Appropriate. There's an R in there, promise. Okay. Fear can actually be a very helpful thing for your body, because if you're scared, you're gonna want to run away or do something, right? So your amygdaloid body helps to start some of that fight or flight, some of that sympathetic division stuff that gets you ready to run away from something that you're afraid of. Usually, like historically, it would have been like a bear or a tiger. But now, sometimes your amygdala starts to freak out if you're scared about a test or whatever it is that people are afraid of. I'm not afraid of anything, okay? Cool. All right, cool. And it also helps with memory formation, just a little bit. but mostly memories that are based on their emotional impact. For example, I had a reoccurring nightmare as a child that my mom and I got eaten by an alligator, right? That memory, not exactly real, but it is one that is stimulating my amygdaloid. If I see a gator, I'm running. Might not be a real memory, but if I see an alligator, I'm running in the opposite direction. Okay?
Never visited Miami then. I'm Florida.
I did as a kid. I will not go back. I refuse. Not even I refuse. I would go sometime maybe for like Disney World, Disneyland, something like that. But also, I ain't playing with no gators.
The water tastes weird.
I agree. Don't drink Florida water. Don't drink swamp water. Just don't do that. This is what your limbic system looks like. You have stuff in here. This is your cingulate gyrus. Your septal nuclei kind of hang out deeper in here. Your hippocampus sits right down here. All kinds of stuff. Okay? That's your limbic system. This is your emotion system. All that's going to be in the recording. That's wild. Okay? So the second functional brain system we talk about, the reticular formation, it is pretty long. It runs throughout the entire core of your brainstem. Its neurons have long branching axons that project to regions all over your brain, such as the thalamus, which is what again? But what I was looking for is the relay station. Yeah, heard that. Oh, yeah. It's the relay station. So all of the sensory information that's coming from your spinal cord is going to pass through your thalamus and then pass up to your whatever cortex it's supposed to be going to. Okay? Next, we have the cerebellum, which controls, coordinates, and smooths motor movements. And then your spinal cord. And your spinal cord does a whole bunch of stuff. We'll get into that later. TBD. Okay? So your reticular formation is going to have axons that project to all of these places. Right? Like I said, it forms some pretty widespread connections, and it's ideal for arousal of the brain as a whole. Keeps you awake, keeps you up, keeps you functioning. Okay? Specifically, it maintains consciousness, and alertness. It helps to keep people awake and wake them up if they fall asleep. And you can imagine in someone with narcolepsy is the ability to fall asleep. It's not even really ability. It's a disorder where you kind of fall asleep without being in control of when you're falling asleep. So it can get pretty dangerous if you're driving and you have a narcoleptic episode. You're just going to be asleep and you're not going to know what happened. I mean, you'll know what happened. You'll figure it out eventually, but you'll wake up and something's going to happen. But in people with narcolepsy, their reticular activating system, or RAS system, doesn't function properly. Okay. Essentially, how this RAS system or reticular formation system works is the sensory ascending tracts. So the tracts from your spinal cord that have sensory information that are going up towards your thalamus, towards your brain, towards whatever, will synapse on these RAS neurons, these reticular activating system neurons. Okay, so they'll pop up here somewhere like that. Those RAS neurons will then relay that stimuli from them to the thalamus. Okay, and then from the thalamus will either tone up or tone down that stimulus based on what it has determined that the body needs. Okay? And then from there, it will pass up to the cerebrum where it needs to be. Can someone go ahead and close that door for me, please? A couple of other things that the reticular formation does is it helps to influence somatic motor neurons. Your somatic motor posture neurons specifically, right? So all of the things that are keeping your back upright, keeping you sitting up, all of that jazz is reticular formation based. Okay, guys, can you believe it? We're done with the parts of the brain, mostly. Now we're going to talk about how the brain is protected. Your brain is protected from injury by several things. One of them is the skull. You remember all those bones of the skull? You have lots of them. Meninges, we'll talk about those in just a second here. Cerebrospinal fluid, which helps to cushion your brain cushion. And the blood-brain barrier, which keeps all of the stuff that's flowing around in your body out of your brain. Super filter. Okay. We've already talked about the skull. We're not going to talk about those too much. We know that there are brains that cover the specific lobes. All of them have a lobe that they cover, except for the insula, because that one's deep, right? Okay, cool. Meninges. The function of meninges is to cover and protect the brain. They hold the blood vessels that supply the brain with blood, oxygen, all the things that a brain needs to do its daily who's its what's its, as well as holding the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, we need all of those things. There are 3 brain meninges. If you've heard of something called meningitis, meningitis is inflammation of these meninges. Very dangerous. Can be bacterial, can be viral. Either way, it's not a good time. Okay? The dura mater, also known as the tough mother, is the strongest of all 3 meninges. It has 2 layers to it. The periosteal layer, which is, it has that osteo. So where do you think that layer is going to be? Closer to the bone. So this is going to be the outer layer. And the meningeal layer is the inner layer. For the most part, those 2 layers are fused, except when you pass one of those dural sinuses. And those dural sinuses are usually where there's like a little bit of space, a little bit of air. Usually there's a vein or something there to help you drain that deoxygenated blood. The largest of those sinuses is the superior sagittal sinus, and that goes kind of right down the top of your head. This dura mater does kind of fold inwards, so it does help to separate the right and left hemisphere a little bit. So if, oh Lord, y'all know I can't draw a brain from this side. Looks like blood. But that dura mater kind of folds into this crevasse here and separates those 2 hemispheres. That's what I'm talking about here. So when we're talking dura mater, it's this guy, these kind of 2, and they're fused together for the most part. Okay. Hello. Again, The dura mater also forms what we call this falx cerebri. And the falx cerebri is the part of that dura mater that hangs on to the bone itself. Remember the crystal galli of the ethmoid bone? Remember I said that crystal galli is what will eventually have the falx cerebri attached to it so that your brain doesn't wiggle around in your skull when you move it really fast. Okay? The arachnoid matter, arachnoid, same as an arachnid. Hello, come on. Is your spider layer. Spider mother. And this is just below the dura mater, okay? The arachnoid matter has some special structures called arachnoid granules. And those arachnoid granules, okay, great. You get what I'm trying to say there. Arachnoid granules, they will eventually refilter your cerebrospinal fluid and send it back into the blood. Because cerebrospinal fluid is just super filtered blood. Two main things that we talk about with the arachnoid matter is the subarachnoid space and the subdural space. The subdural space is just below the dura, subarachnoid space is just below the arachnoid mater. If you heard the term subarachnoid hemorrhage or subdural hemorrhage, right? These are just telling you where that hemorrhage or blood pooling is happening, okay? Last of the meninges is the pia mater. Pia mater is the gentle mother. So you got a tough mother, a spider mother, and a gentle mother. Okay? The pia mater is made of some very delicate connective tissue, and it clings directly to the surface of the brain. They are almost indistinguishable. Okay? And it follows all of the convolutions, all of the sulci and gyri, of the cortex. That's all you need to know about her. She's quick and easy. The cerebrospinal fluid, this is that fluid that fills all of the hollow cavities in your brain. So that central canal in your spinal cord, all of your ventricles, all of that stuff, the fluid in there is cerebrospinal fluid. There's usually only about 100 to 160 milliliters of this fluid in your brain at any given time. So it's really not too much. It's like, maybe that's much. If my tube's this big, it's not that much. It's not a ton of fluid, okay? But it does provide a liquid cushion for the spinal cord and brain, again, so that when you jostle your body around, it's not just hitting the walls of your skull willy-nilly, okay? Some other functions that it has is to nourish the brain and spinal cord, to remove waste. Cool. Several times I've tried here. Scoop that. Remove. And it helps to carry chemical signals. Those chemical signals are usually hormones of some sort. Your cerebrospinal fluid is going to be high in sodium. It's going to be high in chlorine, and it will be low in protein. There should not be a ton of protein in your cerebrospinal fluid. If you find a ton of protein in your cerebrospinal fluid, something is wrong. Okay? Questions? Cool. In your cerebrospinal fluid? Yes. In your kidneys, you don't want to see a lot of protein there either. You will find that cerebrospinal fluid is formed in the choroid plexuses in your brain vesicles. And those choroid plexes are made up of those ependymal cells, which I hope we remember are a type of glial cell, neural glio cell, and capillaries. And like I said earlier, that cerebrospinal fluid is just super filtered blood. Cool? Cool. These are all the places that you're going to find cerebrospinal fluid, CSF. It's everywhere. That thing will wash your brain and spinal cord for fun. It's not for fun. It's for a very specific purpose of nourishing and keeping your brain active, clean, and not having a lot of debris and waste built up in there. Okay? That's what those choroid plexes look like. Last brain protection bit is the blood-brain barrier, or the BBB. And it prevents most of the bloodborne toxins from entering your brain. Okay? You can have bloodborne toxins you can have some bloodborne toxins in your body right now. Probably not. But like if you get sick, you have a bacterial infection, anything like that, you don't want that to be able to pass right up through your brain. Right up through your blood to your brain. So we have this blood-brain barrier that helps to kind of protect. It is not, however, an absolute barrier. There are some things that are able to pass through, such as oxygen. That's good, right? We want oxygen to be able to go to our brains. Another thing that passes through are all of the other quote unquote bad things that our body likes to ingest. Alcohol, nicotine, and anesthetics. That could include general anesthesia, like when you are getting a surgery or something like that. It could include opioids. It could include like the molecules that get through in Tylenol. All of these things help to subdue pain in your body. And your blood-brain barrier does allow for those to pass. let's talk a little bit about the spinal cord. Spinal cord is super, super important. It's essentially an extension of your brain, right? When we talk about the central nervous system, we talk brain and spinal cord. We've done a whole lot of talk about your brain. Let's talk spinal cord now, okay? It provides kind of a two-way conduction pathway. So you have ascending tracts that take information from the peripheral of your body and send it either up to your spinal cord where it needs to be or up to your brain for further processing. And you have descending tracts that will send usually motor instructions down your brain to your spine so that you can do things. Okay? It is the major center for reflexes, and it does a little bit of integration here and there. You will find it in your vertebral canal, all those bones that we talked about, your spinal vertebrae. Okay, vertebrae is different than cord. The vertebrae is the bones, the cord is the neural tissue. Starts at your foramen magnum. And runs all the way down to your L1, L2 vertebrae. But it doesn't quite stop there, okay? After it reaches those L1, L2 vertebrae, you get to what we call the conus medullaris, okay? The conus medullaris is pretty much just some spinal nerves and tissue that kind of extends through. And then the filum terminale is basically just the last connecting bit of connective tissue that attaches your spinal cord to your coccyx at the bottom, again, so that it doesn't rattle around. Embryologically, you have these cervical and lumbar enlargements, and these are where the nerves for the upper and lower limbs arrive. So you've heard of like your brachial plexus. You also have a lumbar plexus. And those nerves send information specifically kind of to your arms and legs. And then cauda equina is a collection of spinal nerve roots, which literally translates to horse tail, because it looks like a horse tail. Equine is horse, cauda is tail, horse tail. That's what it looks like. Your cervical enlargement up there. You have a lumbar enlargement right down here. Conus medullaris, just continuing off of those nerves, and then the cauda equina, your horse tail nerve ends. The spinal cord is segmented. We gave all of the pieces of your spinal cords, or your spinal vertebrae names, right? There was the cervical region, the thoracic region, the lumbar, and the sacral region, right? Our spinal nerves are given a very similar kind of delineation, okay? There are in total, let's see if this will come up later. Great. There are in total 31 pairs of spinal nerves. Okay. There are 8 cervical ones, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. So, just like I said, except for C1, spinal nerve C1, that comes out above the actual C1 vertebrae, everything else is going to come out below. Okay, so those deep grooves. You'll have your dorsal and ventral. Dorsal, median, ventral, median. All right, and your gray matter all up in here. All of this is gray matter, and we'll talk more specifically about that in just a few minutes. Vertebrae or spinal cord, the spinous process is at your back, right? You can feel that spinous process. And remember, dorsal, like a dorsal fin, is going to be on your back. So the dorsal groove is on that back side. The ventral groove towards your visceral ventral organs is going to be toward that front. Okay? An internal gray matter and an external white matter. What it does not have is another external gray layer. Okay? So your spinal cord does not have a cortex. Okay, well, that was supposed to be red, but it does not have a cortex. Okay? White matter, like we said, we know that white matter is made up of mostly myelinated axons. Okay? It does have a few unmyelinated axons, but for the most part, it has myelinated axons. Why? Because that myelination allows for quick neural communication, right? These white matter fibers are classified by type. We have ascending fibers. We have descending fibers. And we have commiseral fibers. Okay. Your ascending fibers, they're going to carry, for the most part, they're going to carry sensory information from the periphery to your spinal cord, up to your brain, Your descending fibers will mostly carry motor instructions from your brain to the spinal cord. Okay? And then from the spinal cord, there's another set of neurons that will send that information, that relay, that stimuli to the effector organs. Okay? And then commiseral fibers, they send information, they carry info from one side of the spine to the other. So that's the white matter. It's kind of shaped like a letter H. You saw that little butterfly looking thing that I drew earlier. Okay. All right. So it's kind of shaped like an H. This is a really ugly version of it, but I tried my best, okay? Don't be mean to me. I'm not an artist, all right? The gray commissure, whatever, is the portion of this gray matter that has the central canal, okay? So this little bit in the middle where all of that cerebrospinal fluid would come from is that central canal. Remember, this is not done in a vacuum, right? We have a dorsal side and we have a ventral side. So we split the horns, those are these guys, into dorsal and ventral horns. You also have some lateral horns that would usually be kind of right over here in this red region, but you only see those lateral horns in some specific vertebrae. I want to say that they are the last few cervical and like the first couple of thoracic vertebrae. Don't quote me on that, okay? But the dorsal horns will consist of interneurons, while the ventral and lateral horns will have cell bodies of motor neurons. Specifically, the gray commissure is the like bridge part of the H. Okay. Like I said, that gray matter is mostly some cell bodies, a couple of axons here and there, and then these are the regions that we talk about. Okay. You'll note that the ventral and lateral horns are usually pretty continuous with each other. All right. That gray matter is organized functionally, right? And we will talk about what that means and what that looks like in just a second here. So, in your white matter, let's say it this way. The white matter has three regions of funiculi. You have a dorsal funiculi, a lateral funiculi, and a ventral funiculi. These are where you will find white matter tracks. That will either be ascending or descending. You'll sometimes find both, but know that these funicular areas are where you will find those tracks that go up and down the spinal cord to send information. Okay. The gray matter, I just said it was organized functionally. It is. It is divided into sensory and motor regions. Okay. On your dorsal horn, sorry, let's put this over here. You will find your somatic sensory, interneurons, as well as your visceral sensory interneurons. In the lateral or ventral horn, you will see some visceral motor neurons specifically, not interneurons, but neuron propers, okay, as well as your somatic motor neurons. Note, the motor portion has neurons specifically. The neuronal cell bodies are here, are in these gray matter pieces. With the sensory stuff, it's just interneurons. So the cell bodies are actually going to be outside of the gray matter in what we call dorsal ganglia. Okay? That's going to be important later. That's what it looks like. Okay? So instead of having my dorsal, my neuron, my somatic sensory neuron itself, the cell body is hanging out right here in my dorsal root ganglion. Remember, a ganglia is a place outside of the central nervous system where cell bodies reside. Okay? That neuron will continue and synapse onto my interneurons way over here in that dorsal horn, whether it be somatic sensory or somatic visceral, or visceral sensory, sorry. Okay? Usually it'll be a little bit of a reflex kind of thing. Sometimes not. Sometimes you'll get further processing up to your brain. Sometimes it'll just be a reflex and it'll tell your body what to do in that motor section. Okay. Things that protect your spinal cord, your vertebrae, very similar to your brain. Your vertebrae, the bones, meninges, which are the layers, and CSF, which is the fluid. All the same meninges, all the same fluid. Dura mater, arachnoid mater, pia mater. Special thing in the spinal cord is these denticulate ligaments, and these just help to anchor your spinal cord so that, again, it doesn't woggle around when you're doing things. They help to anchor your spinal cord laterally. Sometimes, if you need to get an epidural, they're going to put that epidural into that subarachnoid space. Subdural space, sorry. It's going to go somewhere in your spine. I'm not a doctor. All right? But it does go in between the layers of your meninges so that it doesn't hurt as bad when you have to push out a baby. Okay? Cool. Multi-neuron pathways are pathways composed of those white matter tracts, and they connect your brain and your body. The ascending pathways carry information to the rostral parts of your body. Rostral. And those descending pathways will carry info to the caudal portions of your CNS. Rostral is towards your nose. Caudal is towards your tail. When we talk about these pathways, like I said, we kind of split them up into ascending and descending. Remember, you have that, what's it called? Funiculus, right? You have your dorsal funiculus, lateral, ventral, all kinds of stuff, right? So the ascending pathways, they will conduct generally somatic sensory impulses. They will have chains of neurons composed of first, second, and third order neurons, and I will tell you what those are right now. Right? A first order neuron will will be the sensory neuron from the periphery. They will bring the stimulus from the peripheral sensory receptor to your central nervous system. Okay? A second order neuron is inside the CNS, usually in the spinal cord or something, and it will synapse slightly higher. Synapse higher in pathway. And then a third order neuron is another neuron that will synapse somewhere in your brain, usually. Okay. Some important things to know about these white matter pathways in general is that most of them are going to cross at some point. Okay. Most of them are going to have some chains of neurons. That's that first order, second order, third order. Most of them are spatially arranged in some very specific ways so that they then synapse to either the dorsal horn where they need to be or the ventral horn if they're motor. Okay? And then all of these pathways have bilateral symmetry. All pathways bilateral symmetry. So what you see on one side, you will see on the other. Okay? The main ascending pathways that we talk about are the dorsal column pathway, the spinothalamic pathway, and the spinocerebellar pathway. Okay? Spinothalamic is going to go from your spine to your thalamus. Spinocerebellar is going to go from your spine to your cerebrum. And then the dorsal column pathway is going to go past all kinds of stuff. But essentially it'll go from your spine and eventually we'll get to your primary somatosensory cortex. Somatosensory. Okay. Cool. Don't let this scare you. Okay. So these are some of those ascending tracks that I was talking about. This one in the light blue is the spinocerebellar. So your first order neuron, the one that's getting in that sensory stimuli from the sensory receptor, will then pass into the spinal column and do its thing. synapse up there. The next neuron will send it up the pathway until it synapses somewhere else. This one happens to be the cerebellum. If I was going dorsal column, I would have one that's in my first one that would synapse here. I would get up to my second, comes in, synapses at my second. My second will come up and then synapse all the way up here at the third, and then the third will go from that thalamus to wherever I need it to be. Okay? Descending pathways, these are generally going to be motor pathways. Okay? These motor pathways will send instructions down to your spine. And they have a chain of 2 or 3 neurons hanging out with them. We classify them into 2 groups, direct pathways and indirect pathways. Direct pathways are directly from a pyramidal, from the pyramidal tracts from your motor cortex. Okay, remember those pyramidal cells, those really big cells in your motor cortex? Those tracts will eventually form, and those direct pathways will get information directly from your motor cortex. Your indirect pathways, these are going to come from some of your brain stem nuclei. So those, instead of going straight to those motor tracts, your motor cortex, those pyramidal tracts will synapse at your brain nuclei, and then from there, the information will go where it needs to go. Okay. Like I said, those descending pathways will deliver motor instructions. The direct path uses those pyramidal tracts, and the indirect uses brain nuclei. Specifically, the tectospinal tract uses the superior colliculus, the vestibulospinal tract will use the vestibular nucleus. The rubrospinal tract will use the red nucleus. And the reticulospinal tract will use your reticular formation. The fancy name for the direct path that we call them is corticospinal tracts. And you technically have 2 of them, a lateral and a ventral. And the only difference really between those 2 is where they cross. Lateral will cross in the medulla, and the ventral will cross in the spinal cord. That's basically it. These next few slides just kind of show those descending pathways. And then the rest of the PowerPoint kind of talks about disorders and damage. Paralysis is complete loss of motor function. Paresthesia is loss of sensory sensation, loss of any sensation. Paraplegia, half of you is paralyzed. Quadriplegia, all 4 of your limbs are paralyzed. Some brain dysfunction, degenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, a CVA, which is just known as a stroke. You can have different kinds of strokes. We don't need to talk about those right now. That's a physio problem. As a fetus, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. It's a miracle that people are born every day. Encephalopathy is basically where either the brain, cerebellum, or the cerebrum are just completely gone. You don't live very long without a brain. Spina bifida is where the vertebral column does not fully close, so your spine is exposed. Not very great, pretty painful. Cerebral palsy also happens from damage to the cerebral cortex. Your voluntary muscles aren't very well controlled. Postnatal changes, you learn things as you get older. Okay, cool. Some things don't develop till you're 20, like your prefrontal cortex. And as you get old, your brain doesn't work as fast. Okay, cool. That's it. Yay, we're done with chapter 13. Great job, guys. I will